It is Tuesday afternoon, November 26th, and we are, I don't even know how many days, 1, 2, 3, 4 days removed from the NCAA Championships. This is the FloTrack College Cross Country Rankings Show presented by HOKA, final edition, and I'm joined remotely by Ashley Tishins and Matt Bagster. Guys, how you doing?
Doing okay, obviously you and me, Ryan, were just in Madison for cross country championships. Crazy to think we're now a few days removed from it, but as you know, it was super exciting to be down there and just be in all the cross country chaos out there. So almost still recovering, it feels like.
Yeah, and
Seriously.
I'm doing great here in Flagstaff. I mean, it seems kind of weird that the cross country season has started and already finished. It feels like such a short time ago that we were just kicking this thing off, but it ended up being this super exciting race. So I can't wait to kind of dig into it with you guys.
Same. Yeah, we're all remote today. Matt usually is remote, obviously, but Ashley and myself joining the remote nature of this week's show, getting ready for Thanksgiving holiday. Ashley, I forget where you're sitting right now. I'm actually not in a handicap parking spot. I'm actually at a coffee shop that's converted their parking lot into an outdoor lounge. So here in Joplin, Missouri. But it's great to be able to connect before this Thanksgiving holiday. Ashley, yeah, where are you? Are you back in North Carolina?
Yes, back in North Carolina at the family home in Raleigh. As you can see, I'm sitting in one of our spare rooms. I'm literally sitting in my brother's old gaming chair. I'm not a gamer myself. You got to make do with the setup you got. So this is
That's right.
yeah.
All right, gaming chairs, handicap parking, and Matt is just from his normal studio, so it's fun today. But we're talking about digging into NCAA's. I think we jump into it. Today's show, we don't have a new rankings release in terms of the Flow rankings. We do in terms of the rankings reflect obviously the NCAA championship finishes, and within that, as you go on the FloTrack rankings page, you'll see the movement that was made from where teams were ranked heading into the championships to where they actually finished. So that's what the ranking set will reflect today. We're going to dig into that in terms of the biggest movers we saw from the rankings pre-championship to post-championship. And with that said, I think we just jump into some of the highlights, and then we'll start with the women's competition. But BYU took things home on the women's team title. It was a great showing by the Cougars up front for that women's competition. The podium filled out with BYU, West Virginia, Providence, and NAU. And on the women's side, Ashley, what do we see on that individual battle?
Yeah, on the individual battle, it came down to, I know I mentioned in our preview show that I thought there'd be a big three up there at the front, and that was exactly who was up there at the front. It was Doris Lemgole of Alabama, who was able to kick away from Pamela Kosgei of New Mexico and Hilda Olamomoy of Florida down that final stretch to win the individual title on the women's side, 19:21 for 6K. It was then Pamela who was able to hold off Hilda there at the line to finish second. Hilda was third. So some really great front running there on the individual side. And then, as you mentioned, BYU taking that team title, it's a really big bounce back for them. Last year, they finished a disappointing 14th at nationals. And so coming into this, I know we talked with Lexi Halliday Lowry after the meet, and she said, Coach Diljit Taylor told them, hey, this year we're going to be looking for a butterfly moment, right? We're coming out as a caterpillar and then, blooming into a butterfly. And so that's kind of what happened here. I think they talked about battling some adversity throughout the season, some injuries, I think, and they were without some key players, I think, at nationals, but nonetheless, they still come away with the win, and they have that butterfly moment for themselves.
Yeah, so that's a good segue talking about this women's race into how we see the standings shake out and how that compared to the rankings, Ashley. So I'd say let's jump in, take a look. We'll start with our 11 through 20 spots. And then work our way down back to BYU, who you just mentioned. And with this look of 20 through 11 or 11 through 20, however you want to factor it in, you see some pretty solid movement across the board. Some big jumps for teams getting into the top 20. And obviously you can see the full list on the FloTrack rankings page and within the NCAA results. But Ashley, I'll maybe start with you just in some of the movement you see. What are some of the big call outs here from these teams?
Yeah, if you're looking at 11 through 20, biggest mover here, North Carolina, they moved up 13 spots, at nationals compared to their regional ranking from us going into nationals. They put, two in that top 40 there. You had Taryn Parks, who's their number one runner, Bryn Brown, who's their number two. They made the biggest moves over the race and in that final 2K. If you're looking at what Brown did here, huge performance, from her. She finished in the top 60 as a freshman, then 42nd last year, and then 38th this year. So big improvements from her. And then if you're looking at Taryn Parks, I mean, gosh, a huge improvement here from her. If you're looking at what happened last year, she finished 26th at the Southeast Regional, but did not run even at NCAAs. Then back in 2021, she was 210th. In 2022, she was 153rd and 27th at the regional. And then even this year, she was only 27th at regionals coming in the Southeast, but she finishes 26th at nationals. So that's I'm sure for her, that was the race of her life there, in the race of her collegiate career. So kudos to her for helping lead UNC to a pretty big performance there.
Yeah, such a big shift on their move up from, again, 24th going in and coming out 11th. Bryn Brown, maybe not as ranked as high through early season performances, but consistency at the championship. On the opposite end, and Matt, I'm curious, just anything that stands out here. Just one note of a team falling outside of the top 10 is, I see Utah dropping 11 spots. They had come in ranked 8th, moving now down to 19th in the final standings. Anything that stands out to you with the movement here, Matt, with these teams from 11 through 20?
Yeah, I think some of that big movement, especially for Utah falling back that much, it honestly does not take a lot on the day. You can have a solid sort of 1, 2, 3, and then if you have a pretty decent fall off through that fourth and fifth runner, then it's really easy to really, really fall back. But as we're seeing as well with the North Carolina, that if you actually put together on the day a really smart race plan and you have your top 5 perform better than you possibly hoped, then you can actually really jump up through the rankings.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, it's all about all the runners as best they can have in the day on nationals, and I think North Carolina is obviously a great example of that, and they are not the only ones. If we take a look, moving from 11 to 20 spots, if we take a look at our teams finishing in the top 10, teams 1 through 10 on this list, you can see. On the women's side, not a ton of surprises in terms of teams moving in and outside of the top 10, more of a shuffle of teams where they sit within the top 10. And really, obviously, we want to drill in on the podium spots. The only team not predicted to be on the podium here that made it in was the Providence women, who obviously had an amazing day. We saw a great celebration from them and just the bounce back from losing at the conference meet by a point. And then on the flip side of that, Oregon really the only team to fall outside of the podium and just outside. And Ashley, I don't know. There were a ton of huge surprises, at least where we sit. I mean, look at Providence and West Virginia where they finished. I think we talked about those teams leading into the championship. But any surprises or call outs that stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, there wasn't a really whole lot of movement from our regional rankings compared to how it actually played out at nationals. I think one of the bigger surprising things is I think Oregon looked really strong all year long, and then they just didn't. They kind of underperformed to, I think, expectations on the day at nationals. And Ryan, I know you spoke to Shalane Flanagan herself afterwards, and she was pretty blank. She was like, we didn't run to put ourselves in contention for nationals here, and we should have been a national title contender. So I think that maybe that's the biggest surprise. But then also too, I think we got to give kudos to West Virginia. And, again, they started the season unranked. No one even had them on our radar. I know we talked to Sean Cleary last week on the ranking show, and just talking to him about how he was able to put together the squad, and then here they are at nationals and they finished second. I think that's a big move there for the Mountaineers, and I think that's going to give them some encouragement going on, into next year, and then also even into track season as well.
Yeah, Shalane, going back to the conversation with Oregon, Shalane did call out, that their team loves the track, right? It's a bunch of track runners and a lot of mid-distance athletes that are that are transitioning and kind of learning to become cross country runners as well. So maybe some of that shows a little bit come championship setting and kind of end of a long cross country season. But that's finishing fifth and with what she described as more of a mid distance group is going to be great experience for them as they move forward. And she did say they're ready for track. So I think this will probably be fuel to that track fire that we'll see them coming out and running some amazing stuff. I think on the West Virginia Providence side, again, just two teams that showed up on the day, ran really, really well and within their abilities. And then NAU, again, I'm going to pitch this over to you, Matt, being up in flag and part of that program. They finish on the podium. They're one spot out of where we had them ranked at third. And again, Mike Smith's last showing with that squad at the NCAA championship meet. I'm curious your take on how that finished up for them based on what you might have known of their goals heading in.
Yeah, I messaged Jared Cornfield this after the race and said when you try to win, you might get fourth, but if you try to get fourth, you'll never win. And I think that was what NAU really tried to do. They were leading through 4K, and you look at this NAU women's team, and this is where I'll give some real credit to Coach Smith since this was his last cross country season with the program. When he came in, his goal was to get the women where the guys were, because there was no reason that the guys could perform as well as they have been without the women being there as well, since they have all the same resources available to them. And so he, during his time, has worked on this women's team, getting them from not making nationals to now being on the podium for the last 2 years. And for the last 3 years, trying to win. I think in 2022, they went out with the intention of trying to win, and maybe they didn't necessarily quite have the team, but I think they had the confidence to at least try. And then last year they should have tried to win and fell just kind of a point off, which was really tough. And same thing this year. I mean, this was a team that had been dealing with a few things during the season, holding some people out because of injury. And so it was a real uncertainty of how they were actually going to perform on the day. But I mean, they took a massive swing, and I think that possibly cost them a third place, maybe even a second. I don't know, but this was a team that really wanted to try and win, and they still got a really well-earned spot on the podium there. But BYU ran the race that I think we expected them to. They ran smart through the first half of the race and then really pushed through the last half. I mean, that's been BYU women's strategy like this whole season. Is just really coming through in those last couple of K, kind of surprising people a little bit, and then coming through for a much deserved win there. West Virginia, I felt like there was always a genuine risk that their trajectory this season was gonna plateau a little bit, because they've just had this like incredible run of just like every race getting better and better and better. And then sometimes you don't time that perfectly, and your best ends up being a conference regional, and then nationals. You've already kind of burned through your match a bit, but they did it perfectly. Clearly, Sean knew exactly what he was doing. I mean, you could tell even when he was talking to us last week that there was like a little twinkle in his eye, like he was excited. He knew what was coming, and I think he knew something like this was about to happen. So, all credit to them. Providence, obviously, incredible run. You could see by the celebrations of those women after the race just how much it meant for them to get that third place finish. So I mean, the women's race was super exciting, and it played out, pretty close to how we thought it might have.
Yeah, you were talking about the movement of kind of where NAU started the race and maybe faded a little bit. It's interesting when you kind of look at the splits. BYU was essentially in the top two the whole race, and then just kind of moved their way up into that position. Partly moved their way up, but to your point, NAU kind of fell back, right? NAU was up there through about 4K, and then those final kind of 2Ks just faded a little bit. The opposite was, and I would say West Virginia and BYU were relatively similar in terms of remaining steady for most of the race. West Virginia was a little further back in the beginning, But Providence, was kind of the opposite of what we saw with NAU, where when you look at where they started, I mean, I think the first split in, they're like 11th, even through 3K, they're at 9th. And then it was really at 4K, they move up to 5th, and they kind of continued that progression. So it's just so interesting to see the dynamics of each team, where there was some consistency throughout the race for some, and getting position, holding position, aggressive for other teams, and maybe not fading. And then a team like Providence starting kind of way back, and then just clawing their way into that podium and into that top 3 spot. And every team, it's like, it really depends on probably the talent of your team and the style of the runners that you have. And, Matt, that's like, again, like for you with that experience, how does that change year to year with the team? Like when you were on teams, I remember years where you guys went out front and held it. I also remember earlier years where it was like NAU just had this amazing pack and just kind of trampled through the race and came out on top. Like how significant are those dynamics? And is it up to the coach with strategy, or is it really the strategy built around the specific runners you have on the team that year?
Yeah, I think you definitely have to build around the runners that you have. When I was on the team in 2017, 2018, me and Tyler were both really strong. And so it made sense for us always to be at the front and try and keep the pace honest. And so our strategy was go to the front, push as hard as you can. And then some of our other guys are going to sit back a little bit and come through and ideally pick up some of the pieces. But then in other years, there's going to be times where it doesn't make sense to do that because your team's just going to blow up because that's not your strength. And is exactly as you're saying, like if you're looking at these BYU women, they're so strong that it makes no sense for them to try and be too strategic, for them to sit back and try and really move through the field because their strength is their strength. Whereas like you're saying for Providence, if Providence tried to do that, I mean, there's a chance they might have finished outside the top 10 because if that's not your strength, then, a 6K cross country doesn't seem like that long, but you can go back really far, really quick, especially with like for this women's race, how dense some of these packs are. So you definitely 100%, I feel like you just have to play into the strengths of the athletes you have and not get caught up and thinking like a particular strategy has worked in the past with different athletes.
I want to call out one more thing. Just when you take a deep dive into the BYU squad, they didn't have the best top 3 at this meet, right? It's West Virginia. I think West Virginia, Providence, all had a better top 3 in terms of where the scores netted out, but they had the best 4, the best 5, the best 6, and the best 7 runner, to the point where if you take out their number 5 and their number 6 runner and only score their number 7, they're still tying the score with West Virginia. That's how deep this BYU squad ended up being. And Ashley, I don't know if that was a surprise to you. I think we all knew BYU was that deep, but like to see the depth in action and them all run that way on the day was just like, it was pretty amazing to see that.
Yeah, I don't think it was necessarily surprising because I think we've seen that from them all year long. They've been able to just go in and, like you said, just really pack it up and move over those last, couple Ks and come out with some big wins and some big performances. But I mean, I will say, I think it's even more impressive considering, I know they were missing Jenna Hutchins, who has typically been like one of their third runner. And I believe she's going through an injury. So the fact that, you're losing your third runner and you still have people that can step up and slot in there, I think that says a lot about that program.
Yeah. And even you mentioned some of the adversity earlier. I think that was Lexi Halliday-Lowry, who I think Coach Dilgey said, she was a swimmer for the last month or so, and they really didn't know where things were going to come out, and, stepping on the line, finishing where she did in 14th overall, 11th in team scoring, obviously amazing feat there. One more question for you, Matt, before we jump. We want to look at some of the top individuals here and kind of how they netted out in the overall standings. BYU wins by 17 points. Relative, not a huge margin of victory. West Virginia, obviously a great day there. We talk about BYU's depth and how they were able to do that. But when I look down through the top 6 teams, we're talking a matter of 60 points, 66 points. How close is that actually? Like, is that significant? Is that a big gap? In my mind, I'm like, wow, 6 teams within 66 points. That's really, that 60 points can be made up over a K with just one or two runners maybe having a good or bad situation. So how close did you see this women's race? Again, BYU seemed pretty comfortable up front, but just the amount of room for someone to have error, it didn't seem like there was much room for error there.
Yeah, that's honestly a perfect point. And I think the team that emphasized this point is Providence. Like, look at how excited they were when they found out they got third. They had no clue, zero clue. Like, you're just not getting enough feedback during the race to really know where you're positioned. And this was actually, I made a note of this when I was watching the women's race, where it kind of slowed down after the crazy sprint of the start. And it's just this massive, dense pack. And it's so hard if you're an athlete within the pack and you're not right by all the spectators on the sideline where you might possibly be able to get feedback from your coach. You have zero idea. You don't have a very good sense of where you are in terms of your placings. Oftentimes you can't see your teammates. So when you cross the finish line, it's honestly, you just don't really know. So as you're making a point, yeah, I mean, 66 points is not a lot, especially for how dense some of these packs are. But it's even worse just being an athlete within it. And I remember when NAU won back in 2016, I mean, we didn't find out we won until about just over 20 minutes after the race. We genuinely thought like second, third, possibly fourth, if maybe it didn't go our way. We just have no idea. And that makes it incredibly stressful on the athletes. But when you do find out, it also makes you also then end up having a moment like what those Providence women had.
Yeah, for sure. Man, I'm looking at Anna Gardner for Providence. I'm looking at the 2K split. She sat in 199th place, and that was a lot of work. If you look at just how that team score worked out, she goes from 199th to 128th over the last 4K, and that was a huge difference maker for them. And a freshman making those moves and getting on that podium. I think it's time to look at the individuals and we'll zoom in on the top 10 individuals here, and seeing how things played out from, again, the rankings going in to how they actually netted out. And as we look at this, again, not a lot of surprises in terms of definitely the top 3 on here, but we take a look, I think around 4 athletes that surge into the top 10 in Amy Bunnage, Grace Hartman, looks like Peyton Noe and Hannah Gapes from NC State. Ashley, those are some big jumps and big performances on the day it mattered most.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's first start off. I want to call out Amy Bunnage here of Stanford, finishing 4th overall. She didn't even open up her season until the West Regional, which she won. I mean, imagine opening up your season, in November, but then coming away with the win and then coming to nationals and finishing 4th. I know we were talking with her in the mix zone afterwards, and she said she probably only did about 4 or 5 workouts before going to nationals. So I think that just shows that, whatever she was kind of working through to then get healthy for nationals worked out certainly in her favor. And then I think if you're looking down the rest of some of these big movers into the top 10, Peyton Noe, she's one I've had my eye on since even last year as a freshman for Arkansas, a true freshman. She's one that transitioned really well from high school to the collegiate ranks, and she's been a star for them in this year as, again, as one of the top underclassmen, I think, in the entire NCAA. Finishing 7th here is big for her. And then I think as well, calling out Grace Hartman and Hannah Gapes of NC State, those 2 big performances from them helped NC State still finish 8th on the day, which I think, if you're looking at how they ran at ACCs to where they finished here at nationals, I think they would say that this was a win for them on the day. I think they outperformed a lot of the expectations, considering that this was it seemed to be a little bit more of a rebuilding year. So I think looking at all those were great to see.
Yeah, it's a good call out on NC State. I mean, Hartman and Gapes last year were I think the fourth and fifth, or fifth and sixth runners for NC State that won. Hartman was 63rd, Gapes was 73rd. So huge jumps for them on the individual side, getting into the top 10, really the top 8 there. We didn't really call out NC State, but after kind of a tough earlier season, finishing 8th in this meet, and a lot of people talked about, man, what would they have done actually if they had Leah Stevens, who was not there and was in their top 3 last year and 43rd. So that group of freshmen last year will be back for Lori Hannes, and I don't think we've seen the last of them. Matt, I got to ask, on that individual battle up front, while you were watching that and seeing it play out, what was going through your mind, and some takeaways that you had from that race?
Yeah, it honestly played out kind of how we had expected. I mean, those big 3, the Hilda, Pamela, and Doris, all battling it out there. I was a little a little surprised with the start. I think we saw Hilda really almost start putting a bit of a gap on the field, and which is super risky, because that start, everyone is sprinting. Everyone is going just about all out, because as soon as it bottlenecks into the corner, if you're not in a good position, then it can actually be pretty hard to move through the field. And so considering everyone is going really hard and you start putting a bit of a gap, you're using quite a bit more energy than you probably need to, especially considering she then actually kind of put on the brakes pretty soon after that. I don't know if that was something where maybe she burned herself maybe a little bit, and that might have caught up to her later in the race. But in saying that, I mean, I felt like any of these top 3 could have won, just depending on the day, who was going to be feeling best. I mean, I felt like they'd all sort of been going back and forth, and they'd all really showed their strength at different races during the season. And I mean, Doris made the move when it was necessary. You want to start gaining some momentum coming into that final straight, because it's a hill, and it doesn't always look like a significant hill on the camera, but when your legs are absolutely trash coming into that home straight, you certainly feel it. And so I think she made a move exactly when she needed to, got some good momentum going into that final home straight, and then just held it. And yes, I mean, we were kind of going back and forth on who exactly was going to take it in the end. But, you know, in terms of the rankings, I think this is typically what you would see sort of for the top 3, that it could kind of fall into anyone's hands, and we didn't have it right in the top 3. And Doris just ran a great race.
Yeah, the international talent we've seen in the NCAA this year, obviously these runners are highlighting that. And I think the women's is different than the men, where the ones that we've targeted as up front all season were there. I think on the men's side, when we get to that, you'll see a lot of that. There's some shifting happen. Someone like Solomon Kipchoge doesn't even start the race. But Ashley, on this, I mean, we see Doris and Hilda both move up a spot from where they were a year ago in the final standings. But the newcomer, Pamela Koskai, which we should give a shout out. We got the correct pronunciation of her name. I think we finally asked. There was a little debate throughout the season. Pamela. She confirmed that for us. But any takeaways that you have from her in her first NCAA cross?
Yeah, I think everyone, I mean, shoot, I even picked Pamela to win this race going into it. So I think that just speaks volumes to just how talented I thought she was. You know, I saw her, the way she raced at pre-nats, and the way she was able to just outkick Hilda up that final stretch. I was like, wow, I mean, she's the real deal. I mean, and it should come as no surprise, though. I mean, she's competed at World U20 Cross Country Championships, and she's performed really well there. So we know kind of that talent she is even on even a more global stage than NCAA. So I think that, you know, having her here come second, I think this is just probably just the first time we're going to see her perform super well here at NCAAs, whether it's cross country or track. Excited to see how she does on the track as well going forward.
Well, that kind of wraps up our women's discussion. Again, you can go on FloTrack, check out the full ranking set, and see the movement for all the NCAA individuals and teams from where they were pre NCAA championships to now after the championships, how the results actually shook out, and how those athletes and teams perform based on those rankings heading in. So with that, we'll transition over to the men's side, and we'll start with a look at men's teams 11 through 20 and how things shook out there. And you can see, going through, again, some pretty good movement, a few teams making it into the top 10 that were not previously ranked in the top 10, and not a lot of teams, I should say, falling outside of the top 10. I think we have a couple that maybe were in there. Alabama was one. You can see ranked 10th going in, falls to 18th. But Ashley, on the men's side, this group of teams, what are some of the call outs you took away from this?
Yeah, if you're looking specifically at 11 through 20, the biggest move you're going to see here is Syracuse. They moved all the way up to 11th here on the day at Nationals. If you're looking at how they got that done, though, to finish 11th, it was their second and third runners they were the biggest movers if you're looking at our rankings and how much they moved up compared to our rankings after regionals. Asaf Harari and Alex Comerford. I really want to talk about Comerford here for a second, too. He was only 107th last year, and he was only 20th at ACCs this year. And then just 2 years ago, he didn't even finish at his regional meet. So he's never really had that traction really on a national scale. But then, this year he finishes 76 at nationals. I think that's probably a pretty big breakthrough for him here on if you're looking at him racing in a national caliber field. And he really was a big reason why Syracuse was able to come away with the 11th place finish.
So definitely a great day for the Syracuse Orangemen. Our colleague Nia Gibson, now part of our team, always giving Syracuse a shout out. So I know she was pumped to see the movement there. I do want to give a shout out to CBU, Cal Baptist, Coach Sean Smith, his first season there. Their men having a great showing. Again, 20th coming in, finishing 13th, knocking on the door of that top 10. And obviously we see Furman here moving up when you look at those results from 22nd to 17th, and in large part to Dylan Schubert, who we'll talk about his third place finish. But looking at the top 10 teams and how things shook up there, we look at 1 through 10. Some movement here. I'd say there's obviously a huge move here with Wisconsin breaking into the top 10 and even into the podium, which I don't know that anyone predicted. You see Notre Dame also sliding into this top 10. Matt, I'm going to start with you on this, just that Wisconsin performance. There's obviously the podium, not a lot of surprises, but Wisco, I don't know that anyone would have predicted them to finish top 4 in that race.
I was joking towards the start of the season when we had talked about Wisconsin a little bit that, they'll really need the home course advantage. And I think they used it. I mean, they, from what I was seeing and what I was hearing, was that they ran one of the smartest races of any team in this race, that they started a little further back and then slowly moved forward. I mean, this is exactly what you were talking about, Ryan, about having teams run to their strength. And that was their strength moving forward. And especially when you do have a home course like that, you want to be feeling good coming into those last few Ks so you can use that energy, because that's when the crowd's really going to start getting behind you and screaming at you and shouting and everything. And so I think Wisconsin ran an incredibly smart race, probably used some of that home crowd support and what they know of the course through those last few K and were rewarded with a podium finish. I think that was one of the most impressive performances, because even though they didn't necessarily come in, as we're saying, as a really highly ranked team, but just with it being a home course, they're going to feel the pressure. They're going to feel there's this expectation and that people are going to hope that they can do something that maybe they don't even necessarily believe that they're capable of doing, but they did it. So all credit to them. I mean, Mick Byrne did a great job with them, getting them ready for this race.
I gotta run through this, just like their progression throughout this race, because it's pretty amazing. And I think you make a good point, Matt, of the pressure that they felt. I don't know that there would be any other team ranked outside of the top 10 in many scenarios that probably had more pressure on them than Wisconsin, because of the rich tradition and history that they have. If you were you ever been to the course, especially for nationals, the amount of fans that they draw, regardless of where they're ranked, is pretty amazing. So, but when you look through this, I'm going to go through the K splits of where they were. 27th at 1K. This is in the team standings. 24th at 2K. And I think sorry, they were 27th at 1K, 16th at 2K, so big move up. 14th at 3K. They go 11th at 4K. Halfway through this race, they're now in 10th position. 9th, 8th, 7th, 5th with 1K to go, and then they move up into that 4th spot. So just that consistency of how they move and how far back they were at 1K was unbelievable. And so to see them, just like, you could see it and feel it in the crowd. Ashley, I think you and I were both near the finish line, just watching every K and the crowd kind of seeing, oh wow, the Badgers. It was such an awesome kind of awesome way to experience it, with the live splits and the crowd just following along that whole way.
Yeah, it was super cool. And then I think even just seeing their reaction after the race, I mean, they were super pumped that they finished fourth, and how I can imagine that's, due to the fact of how they race and the race plan. I'm sure that was their race plan going in, and they seemed to execute it almost to perfection there. So I think it was really cool, again, having that little bit of that home course advantage there, I think certainly played in their favor.
Yeah, but Bob Liking, Big Ten Bob, who was 83rd a year ago, showing up big for his team, finishing in 14th in his last cross country championship. He always could get it at Big Tens, but never quite at NCAA's. And he cracked the code, and obviously they reaped the benefits of that performance from him. But not the only team. I know we're harping on them, but the big race up front: BYU, Iowa State, Arkansas, Oklahoma State, who we had kind of favored. Just, I think we debated, should they have really been favored going in after just after what we had seen from BYU. I think obviously that question was answered, but Matt, going to Oklahoma State and kind of where they ended up there, how did you kind of just take, like, what did you take from their performance and kind of analyze around how they finished up?
Yeah, I think Dave Smith was kind of highlighting this a little bit when he was talking at the press conference leading up to this race, that he was almost kind of trying to remind his guys about how to run as a team. That when they're running some of these races during the season, there was these real individual focuses of going out and trying to get the win, and individually for a lot of these guys. And I'm just not sure if on the day they had it all figured out as a team. I think Oklahoma State is so strong that realistically, I mean, they just shouldn't have finished 8th. Even on a bad day, they shouldn't have fallen back that far. So the way I look at something like that is the athletes during the race, when things start getting really hard and the expectations start changing of, hey, maybe we're not going to finish first or second or maybe even third this year. You want the athletes to still at least try and fight for every single spot, maybe still fight for fourth, fight for fifth and sixth. But if you kind of lose sense of that, then it's really easy to slip back and finish where they finish with 8th. So I think this is going to make for a scary Oklahoma State team next year, because I don't think they'll make that mistake back-to-back years. But yeah, I think that was a bit of an unfortunate race for them for sure.
Yeah, I think actually it might have been you, I forget, on our team, where it was early in the race, maybe in the first K or two. I think you were running around the course and maybe were near some of the staff from Oklahoma State. And the reports that we got on the course were that one of the athletes might have gone through something where they were walking or having trouble kind of actually competing within the race. And I think you walked by one of the staff in the moment where they said, "Oh man, we might be effed," expletive, right? So I think it felt like, based on what we saw early on, they knew it was going to be a tough day.
Yeah, I think it was maybe around 3 or 4K. Yeah, I just happened to pass by one of their assistant coaches on the phone with, I'm assuming Dave Smith or someone else on the staff. And yep, you're right. I won't say exactly what he said on this show here, but yes, he said, yeah, we're were effed. So yeah, that's probably they knew, I think, a little early on that, hey, this isn't going to be our day. But so that's kind of where you see here they finish 8th.
Uh, Matt, I'm going to jump to I want to talk BYU and obviously their sweep of the title, but NAU we mentioned on the women's side getting that podium spot. NAU on the men's side finishing a spot up from where we had them ranked in 5th, about 25 points outside of the podium. Again, if Wisconsin doesn't have the finish they do, maybe they get that podium finish and Mike Smith walks off with a double podium with their teams. But yeah, just curious how you saw the Lumberjack finish up, and again finish up kind of the end of this era with Mike Smith leading the helm.
Yeah, this is, and I've kind of alluded to this at different parts of the season, that this is just a different NAU team in terms of their strengths as to what we've seen since 2016. 2015, the team didn't make nationals, and this team, these guys getting 5th, was actually the furthest back they've finished since they were last at nationals, I guess in 2014. Well, no, even before that. But so this team was just in a different spot. They're going into this, and to be honest, a really tough place, because people have really high expectations of this NAU men's team, and they're like, okay, even though you lost a lot of firepower over the spring, you're still NAU, you're still going to find a way, right? But you just, that's not always going to happen. And if you look at any national title run in history, throughout the history of the NCAA with cross country, it always comes to an end at some point. No team, even we look at Arkansas and some of the runs that they've had, it never goes on forever. And so this was always going to get to a point where NAU was going to have, and this is not suggesting this is a down year, but I mean a year where maybe they fall off the podium a bit. The one thing I really give credit to these NAU guys for is that this was their best race of the season. I mean, they had really been trying to figure it out. They'd be going into races and trying to do kind of what NAU had done in the past, and send guys out to the front and try and go really hard and see if they can still win these races. And they would have some guys really struggle and fall back, and they were really trying to figure out their strategy. And I honestly say, I think they had a near perfect strategy for the day if the race was a little quicker at the front. I think because of, and we'll talk about this with how some of the individual stuff played out, I was anticipating that the race at the front was going to be a little more suicidal, that there was only going to be a couple of people who could hang, everyone else was going to drop, and we were going to have this this mass amount of people dying. And I think that would have really benefited NAU to come through more. But it ended up being, and with all due credit to the fact that this was still a course record, but it ended up being slightly slower than maybe we would have anticipated. And so I think NAU probably had a little bit of a harder time moving through based on how far back they started. On a perfect day, yeah, maybe they could have challenged Wisconsin a little bit more. But I also like some of these storylines as much as I love NAU, and I love seeing NAU finishing 5th based on the season that they've had. I mean, I also love the fact that Wisconsin got on the podium. I think they really deserve that. And I think on this day, NAU just deserved a really good, solid, hard-earned 5th place.
Now, you made a comment about people running up front. I want to transition to our team champs here, because when you say up front, obviously Casey Klinger with their guy leading them up front, but they led this competition the entire way, right? And then we talked on the women's side about NAU women kind of being the front runners early and then kind of fading. BYU went out aggressive with their olive oil. I don't know if you saw the video, Track All Access. I think they talked about the olive oil, but Gordon getting the footage of the coaches actually rubbing the olive oil all over these guys was pretty awesome. But to see them from 1K all the way through in first and holding it, it just seemed pretty amazing. Actually, I don't know, like I just remember seeing like the team movement behind them, and I was like waiting for anyone to like catch them at any point in that race, just see the splits change. And it just didn't happen. It just seemed so dominant in terms of the aggression they had, where they had their team placed and where it finished up. Any surprises and this is for either of you, any surprises in how they went out and how they held that throughout the course of a 10,000 meter race?
I think if you're looking at how they performed all season, they do a pretty good job of packing up and sticking close together. I know if you ask Ed Eyestone what one of his mottos is for the team, it's just to pack up and to battle. And that's exactly what happened here today. Now, I will say, so they got out to such a significant lead. I mean, at points it was, 60-point lead or something like that. And I will say it did come back a little bit toward the end. And I think that, if you watch some clips from Ed Eyestone during that race, he was just kind of telling guys to fight through and to hold on and, just keep fighting for that team title. So even though they did go out to a significant lead early, they did have to hold on a little bit there at the end, but they got the job done. But I think that's kind of classic BYU. Again, what we've seen from them all season. And Casey Klinger, he performed super well for them as well. And I think maybe the olive oil was a great little trick for them. Obviously, it seemed to work. So yeah, I think that's what we saw on the day from them.
Matt, for you, any thoughts on just how they executed that race?
Yeah, I was a little concerned with I felt like toward the end of the season, I felt like they were showing their cards a little bit too much, which is what Oklahoma State usually doesn't do. Usually they keep things under wraps, and so no one really knows exactly how they're going to look going into nationals. And I felt like BYU, you're starting to show all your cards. You're starting to show how good you are. And I felt like that was actually going to play into the hands of Oklahoma State a little bit, even though, as Ed Eyestone was saying ahead of the meet, that he still viewed his team as underdogs, even though they were kind of ranked number one. And NAU has done the same thing in the past. It's always better, even if you're the top ranked team, you still want to view yourself as an underdog. That makes it so much easier to go into the race and actually perform. And I mean, these BYU guys are just so strong that even as we're saying, like, yeah, I mean, they fell back a little bit later in the race, but once you're starting to get through 8K and they still have that lead, I mean, I had absolute faith that they were going to hold it. I mean, these guys have done this before. They train at altitude. Based on what I know about Ed Eyestone's training, it's strength based, and so these guys were going to be ready for that. And if we're looking, I mean, it's not a surprise to me that we have BYU sweep both podiums on the men's and women's side. I mean, one of the things I always look for, and this actually, I mean, if we look at West Virginia as well, when we had just recently talked to Sean, their coach, team culture is huge. That's going to take you places that talent won't take you. And so when you look at what Dijit is doing on the women's side, you look at what Ed Eyestone is doing on the men's side, I mean, the culture is incredible. And so when these guys, if I'm looking at the guys' team, when they're in the middle of the race and they're hurting and they're starting to fall back and they're struggling, they're never going to give up. That's what you can guarantee with these men and women on the BYU teams. They will not give up. They're going to keep fighting, and that most of the time is going to get you there.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, to your point, BYU, just amazing day for both men and women. And again, first sweep in 20 years. I think last to do it, Colorado, Buffalo, when they won the national title in 2004 on both the men's and women's side. One last team I want to call out just in this top 10 as we're talking is Wake Forest. They finished 7th, which, is where we had projected them to finish. But there were a lot of question marks around who was going to be healthy, how, could they be better than 7th? I think that was a sleeper pick for me coming in for the podium. And throughout the entire race, they were in podium position up until 9K, right? Not on camera, but we got to talk to John Hayes, the coach there at Wake Forest, the day before. And he let us know that Rocky Hansen, the guy who had looked great early in the season at some of the Wisconsin events, but then come ACC and regionals where he sat out, he had dealt with some sickness, and then that sickness translated into just a really rough finish at the NCAA or at the ACC championship where he overheated, and so there was a lot of question marks around how they would actually finish. Hayes thought maybe a top 10 finish would be great for them based on what they had been dealing with. But again, seeing them in podium contention with 9K or at the 9K point, all 5 of their runners were between 37th and 54th at that point. So very close to 5 guys in All-American position. Rocky Hansen was in 46th place at that point. And if you look at those end results, Hansen finishes in 100th, drops 54 places, and that's about what they were out of the podium when you compare their score in 7th place to where Wisconsin finished. And so that's not to say this is all on Rocky. He kind of fought back and made a huge effort to be back there for his team. Come national times, finishes as their 5th guy. But I think we know that he has just the outlook in terms of how strong he is to be a top 20 individual, if not higher, when he's game on. So they lose one guy. That's a team of mostly sophomores. They lose one guy next year, and so I think that's just a team to watch for when we're talking about podium in 2025. So just shout out to them for the performance and being there on the day and putting themselves in it. But again, these team standings are made up through these individual finishes, and I think with that we want to look at our top 10 men's individuals and where they finish compared to rankings. A few big movers as we look at this, a few folks that are not surprises to this top 10. Really, I should say none of the names are real huge surprises, but maybe in how they finished. I take back my last comment. I think the big surprise here, obviously, Dylan Schubert, and maybe we start there, Ashley. You see a big moves from Parker Wolf, 16 positions up, but not a huge surprise to see him in the top 10. But Schubert from Furman, I think everyone was seeing the final stretch and being like, who's the Furman guy? What is he doing up there?
And it's funny because I think people were surprised to see him there, but if you look at how he's performed at nationals in the past, it's not a huge surprise per se, right? If you're looking at how he ran in 2023 and 2022, just last year in Charlottesville, he was 23rd, and then in 2022, he was 11th. So he knows how to perform and be an All-American, but obviously certainly 3rd, that's a huge jump there. And also, I think probably part of the surprise comes to the fact that we haven't really seen him race much all season long. We were talking with him afterwards in the mix zone, and he spent the entire summer biking and cross training because he was coming back from an injury. And so he made his season debut at Pre-Nats, where he finished 40th. But then from there, it was just a straight upward trajectory. He was 1st at the Southern Conference Championships, 3rd at regionals, and then 3rd at nationals. So I think if you're looking at a guy like Schubert, it's, maybe wasn't expected for sure to finish 3rd there, but obviously a big performance for him. Whatever he was doing, the cross training regimen to get him back on the grind here certainly worked well for him.
Matt, I want to talk about a few of these call outs, but I think I got to jump to the guys that we see at the top of this list. In front of Schubert in Blanks and Haptom Samuel. I think those are how we had them ranked going in, Blanks and Haptom, but you really could have flipped a coin on really who you believe could win. Blanks shows he defends his title and just shows how strong he is. You mentioned the course record earlier in the show, but we haven't. It's crazy we got to the end of the show and haven't mentioned the one shoe with Haptom Samuel. Just the performance he had and the guts he showed. The bloody foot, the stitches afterwards. I mean, what do you make of that battle between Blanks and Haptom, given what happened in that race?
Yeah, as I was kind of talking to Ashley before, that no matter what, Graham Blanks won, and that dude has had an incredible season and ran a really smart race, made a hard move with a K to go, and so being back to back champion, I mean that's huge. I think it was being read out maybe on the broadcast afterwards about just how many people have been able to manage that, and it's a very short list, and now Graham Blanks is on that, so absolutely incredible for him. Haptom Samuel, man, it was as soon as it became aware from me watching the feed that he was running with one shoe, it was then really up in the air. It was not only was I pretty pessimistic that he was going to even finish on the podium. I mean, I thought there was a chance he'll drop out because there's a genuine risk losing your shoe when it's that cold, and he got spiked as well. Someone stood on him. You're starting to slip. Your foot is going numb. I mean, there's a chance you're going to genuinely hurt yourself. So you at some point have to consider, okay, I still actually have a career beyond this one race. Is it worth potentially doing some damage here? And maybe it's smarter to actually step off. And so all credit to him. I mean, for him to battle through with one shoe for about 6K of the race, dealing with all that adversity, all the pain that he's got going on his foot, somehow to not be constantly slipping and still be there for an uphill finish to finish second is just absolutely incredible. And if you could edit the final home straight footage and you could just show Graham blanks, you'd be like, oh yeah, that guy won based on how excited he was. But if you could remove Graham blanks, you'd think, oh, Hobson Samuel won. Like with how excited he was coming into the finish. Obviously, he probably just didn't think he was going to make it that far in the race. And then even same thing, if you removed Hobson Samuel and you had Dylan, you'd think he won with how excited he was. And I think that was what was so awesome about this podium was, yeah, sure. I think maybe for Hobson Samuel, like, yeah, maybe he felt like he was in a really good position to win. But I think each of those top three guys were so appreciative of the position that they did finish in that it just made for like such a satisfying podium finish.
Yeah, it was that finish and just the embrace of those two at the finish line was just amazing to see the sportsmanship. And then obviously that carried over in the award stand, the switch of the jerseys, and kind of honoring one another and just that camaraderie that those two showed. It wasn't Captain, we talked to him after. There was no frustration or this was my race and the shoot thing happened and woe is me. He was very grateful and gracious in receiving that second place finish that he earned and just that relationship with him and Graham. So I think it was just a really, really special moment. And that's like, it'll be, you think about the track and the Josh Kerr, Jakob Ingebrigtsen kind of tense rivalry. This I think is shaping up to be a rivalry, but like in a much more kind of loving and and like heartfelt way where you want to see these guys compete. They appreciate each other. And every time they go out there, they're gonna battle, but really appreciate what one another brings to the table when they're on the track and on the cross course together. That said, just kind of two of these other call outs I want to make. One, I guess a couple. Casey Klinger obviously leading BYU in his last individual showing out there, finishing in sixth, where we had him ranked going in, but then just kind of on either side to him. Parker Wolf mentioned big jump up, not a surprise, but dealing with a foot injury late in the season. Coach Milt, we talked to him before the race, and he was like, Parker's in better shape than he was a year ago. And so we feel good about that. But the race itself is just so much stronger. We don't know where that's going to place him, knowing he's not 100%. We know he's better than a year ago, but we know he's not 100%. He finishes seventh, a real great showing. Him and his teammate Ethan Strand, who've been just working together. It feels like each of these last meets with regionals and ACCs. But Ashley, I want to ask you about Yassine Adala in fourth. I feel like we were talking a lot about Karami Yego, Patrick Kiprop, and those being potentially the leaders for Arkansas. But Abdallah, he finishes fourth overall, leads the team to their podium finish. Super excited to see Galen Rupp in the mix zone, all those fun things. He seemed like he was riding high.
Yeah, Yassine, he if you're looking at what he's done this season, I guess coming into this race, he didn't even race regionals. He was rested. They didn't need him to go out and win their South Central regional title. So he was coming into this feeling very fresh. And I think we saw the reaps of that decision here, on the course. You saw some of his teammates, like you mentioned, Karami Yego and Patrick Kiprop leading for a good bit of that early part of the race. However, they would end up dropping back a little bit, still finishing All-American, but dropping back off the pack. But it was Yassine that was still up there with those front runners, really trying to push with everyone. And, perhaps I think this is just it's a really great result. I think, especially considering he had such a long summer, running the Olympic marathon for Sudan and running so well there. And then, coming back from that and taking a little bit of a break, but then getting right back into cross country. And if you're looking at him too, I believe he's one of the top improvers from last year's race to this year. I think he moved up close to 180 something spots from what he finished last year to what he finished this year when he was at Tennessee, and then to now where he's at this year at Arkansas. So if you're looking at that, I think he's one where I've talked to him before, and he talks about how he's just never been able to really put the pieces together when it mattered at nationals. But this year, he finally got those pieces put together.
Yeah, in a big way, I'd say, in a real big way. Guys, we've been following this throughout the season. Men's, women's, individual, team battles. We've seen it all shake out. It's been an honor to follow the journey of this cross country season with both of you. Super exciting to just, again, the rankings releases, the talk, the chatter, to see it all played out in Madison on Saturday was just awesome. This being the last show of the season, any words that you guys want to leave with those that have been following any of the athletes from the NCAA? Matt, maybe just start with you. And once again, appreciate you for joining us, giving the insight at the level you've run at this, and bringing that insight into the show.
Yeah, watching this race in Wisconsin was feeling nostalgic, considering that was back in 2018. That was my final race for NAU, and funnily enough, when I just remember when I finished that race, I was actually happy to be done. Like 3 years of competing at that high of a level with that kind of stress and the expectations of winning each time you went out there. I finished that race, and when we found out we had won, I was just like, I felt like I had given everything I could give at NAU. And so I was really at peace, like, hey, this is my time to move on, and these other guys can come through and help the team in the future. In saying that, ever since then, whenever I watch the NCAA Cross, all I think is, man, I would just love to be on that start line again. You forget about it. You forget about the pressure, all of that goes into it. And once I'm reminded of and know that until after the race and it's all kind of done, but doing a cross country season with your team, and then finishing at the end, especially if it's a satisfying finish for whatever your team has been trying to do during the season, there's just nothing like it. And it's really hard to replicate that in any other area of our sport. We just don't see that very often, where you can really compete like a team, like we see at NCAA Cross. So my final point is for anyone who's done, I feel for you, because it's tough when NCAA Cross is all kind of finished. But for those who are still going, just keep enjoying it, keep having fun, because I certainly miss it. And to Ashley and Ryan here, and even FloTrack in general, I really appreciate you guys having me on. I've loved reminiscing and talking about these teams and following the season a little bit more in depth than I have since being at NAU. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys, and yeah, hopefully I can do something else for FloTrack in the future.
Yes, yeah. I don't think this is the last we'll be seeing each other on this forum. So we thank you for, again, just being a part of this and the insight, and we wish you all the best for Valencia in what have we got, a week and a half or so?
Listen, I leave tomorrow. It's this Sunday. Yeah.
Oh, this Sunday. Yeah, a week, less than a week. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. And I appreciate it.
Anything the fans should know about performance? What are we looking out for from Matt Baxter?
Well, you watching the feed, as you had mentioned that this is going to be on FloTrack. You will most likely not, and that'll be a very good thing because the front packs are situated. Maybe a little bit further back. I think there's about a 64 flat-ish group through halfway, and that's what I'm going to be attaching myself to. So, yeah, we'll see. My personal best right now is 214 from CIM, and I'm looking to try and take a good chunk off of that.
Awesome. Well, we will be following along. Ashley, thank you for all the insight and behind the scenes that you've brought to the show each week. Excited to continue this, and I think people will be seeing us come indoors here in just a couple weeks' time. I know BU is about to kick off.
Yeah, that's for sure. Even though cross country season's over, which it's crazy to think, I feel like it flew by. I mean, I feel like I was just out at Nuttycombe covering that meet to kind of kick off the season. But yeah, we're here, and then I'm excited for all the BU meets to come. I mean, as we all know, track and field, cross country, distance, it never stops. It's a year round sport. So excited to see this all continue on and continue to cover collegiate track and field and cross country and just the whole sport in general.
Yeah, we say cross country's over, but it really continues another for 2 more weeks when they all set the line at BU. So we'll maybe have another team score coming after the BU season opener. We'll see. But with that, for myself, Ashley, Matt, thank you so much for joining throughout this season. This is again final episode of the FloTrack College Cross Country Ranking Show presented by HOKA. Results are in the books, so go back, watch the replays, dig into the results, refollow along the season that you just got to witness, and take it all in before, as Matt said, before it's gone. But thanks once again from FloTrack and all of our producers who help with this show. We will be seeing you in just a few weeks during the indoor season, BU season opener, as we mentioned. And until then, happy Thanksgiving, and we will see you again soon.